Halloween is over, which means the march toward Takesmas has begun. Look, don't blame me, blame the ever-increasing cycle of American consumerism. Now that we know how to break him, Human Torch should be a 3-2 hashtag thanks Sparky. I put this at the very front of the video because I think it's revealing of a certain bias among Marvel Snap content creators, Marvel Snap players at the top level. A lot of things that are quite obviously and on their face true about top level gameplay in Marvel Snap are not nearly so true about the majority of people who play Marvel Snap. If you look at anyone who has a passing familiarity with even relatively high-level Snap content, you will get the sense that Move is an oppressively powerful deck that needs to be dealt with. And I believe that this is true in that cohort. But because of Move's general difficulty issues, not just being a deck where you have to make a million decisions, but also the mechanical way in which those decisions stack on each other. Compare Move and Destroy for decks that are built around doubling, and you can see one of them is much more mechanically intensive because one of them allows you to double individual cards multiple times in one turn, and you have limited resources with which to do that, and the other one is just play your guys, blow them up. Play your guys, blow them up. It is much easier for a lower level player to understand what they're supposed to do with the Destroy deck and execute that game plan, where with a Move deck, I'm not even sure they'll understand what they did wrong. Oh, I devoted one too many moves to Human Torch and not enough moves to my dagger, so I lost the 2 lanes that Human Torch wasn't in. That's just not the kind of thinking that you get a lot of. So while I think that it is true, at a high level, you could make Human Torch a 3-2, it wouldn't hurt Move at all. At a low level, I'd be pretty surprised if that was true. I think Move at a low level is one of the harder decks to play, if not the hardest deck to play in the game. And largely, what I'd like to point out here is it's not impossible for them to make changes based on high-level gameplay. It's just, I don't think that high-level players should be going into this stuff expecting what is obvious to us to be something that means or necessitates a change. And I see a lot of this. I see a lot of like, why do they keep buffing Move? Why do they keep buffing Move? Oh my God, I can't believe it. Move keeps getting better and better. I am very confident that this isn't necessarily as true as people think that it is. I don't think they'd be going around nerfing Mercury if Move was like a 60% win rate deck for your average rank 70 player. That's just not how this works. The fact that they feel comfortable removing these barriers to Move being an elite deck is indicative that it isn't an elite deck outside of the top level. And I think it's also important to note that I mean the really top level. Like, people get a little bit iffy when you start saying like, oh, top 1,000, top 200. I think there are probably 25 people who can actually play this deck well in the entirety of Marvel Snap. I do not think it is a big number. And so a lot of high elo perspectives on the deck are skewed by having to play with and against those people. Basically nowhere else is this actually a serious problem, I suspect. And I think that high elo players need to sort of recognize that, or even like not even necessarily high elo players, but people who get their information from high elo players. Like me, I've had Move as the best deck in the game for multiple weeks now, right? It's like, oh, it's Move, it's one of the 4 best decks in the game. It's in the first part of my Twitter post for the best decks. I don't think that means that it has to be nerfed, because that's simply not the experience that anyone who isn't playing the deck at a high level will have with the deck. And that is a real wrinkle in trying to do content around this kind of stuff, because I do think it's worth learning the deck, but there's just a lot that you're going to have to do. The ceiling on the deck is extremely high. The floor on playing the deck competently is extremely high. Like, it doesn't have a high floor built in. It has a very high skill floor, which is to say, you should probably play some other deck if you're not that good. It's just a weird situation. The closest analogy I can give to it is Loki from a little bit ago, back when that was the best deck in the game. It required so much of you in terms of game sense and knowledge of matchups in order to actually be good that it took basically forever to get nerfed or reworked. And I think move is in a similar spot. Like, it is very clearly a little bit too strong, maybe a lot too strong. But I also think that it simply isn't that if you aren't amazing at the game. People get too hung up on the specific name of things and miss the out-of-the-box synergies. I see a lot of, we aren't getting any more zombies, so horde sucks, which misses that the new spells coming are also new cards for the zombie deck. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great example, right? Like, everyone started talking about, okay, they're not making any more zombie horde cards, so that must mean that zombie horde is bad, and missing that, for example, zombie Scarlet Witch hooks in with approximately every cheap skill they will ever release. Zombies Mr. Fantastic hooks in with approximately every created card synergy they will ever release, and they have access to OTAs, balance patches, if they feel the need to make these cards feel a little bit better. I do think that this is a product of very inside the box thinking. I think it is like, oh, well, how does destroy get better? Well, it gets better destroy cards. But that's because destroy cards only hook in with destroy cards. And move cards really only hook in with move cards. And that's an issue of the way those cards were designed, which has given people a different expectation of what an archetype means. When you're playing a discard deck, you're playing a bunch of cards that work when they're discarded and a bunch of cards that discard stuff. When you're playing a destroy deck, you're playing a bunch of cards that work when they're destroyed and a bunch of cards that destroy stuff. When you're playing a move deck, you're playing a bunch of cards that work when they're moved and a bunch of cards that move stuff. When you're playing a zombie horde deck, you're playing a card that has specific inputs on it in a way that is not analogous to the destroy type of thing. The closest you get is maybe Zombie Giant Man. But the issue is, what does this archetype actually hook into? It hooks into Kitty Pryde, Merlin, Werewolf, cheap spells. That's what the zombies hook into. It's not nearly so A to B as discard cards and cards that work when they get discarded. And I think the fact that many archetypes are that kind of A plus B thinking is what gives rise to thinking that Zombie Horde will be another one of those. If Zombie Horde ends up being bad in the future, it will be because of a couple of reasons. Largely, nerfs to Merlin, nerfs to Werewolf, nerfs to Zombie Scarlet Witch, or metagame shifts such that that no longer becomes a dominant method of point acquisition that you can pair with tech. And we've seen plenty of metagame shifts of that type before. Maybe they make another Invisible Woman First Steps type card, and scaling in a fairly linear way is disincentivized. I can't be sure. But I think largely it's not necessarily that people are wrong about this because they're dumb and aren't thinking about it. It's because the game has conditioned them to think of synergy as A plus B. Victoria hand plus created cards. Cards that get discarded plus cards that discard. And not in a sort of more open-ended way where the zombies feel pretty clearly designed in a lot more of an open-ended, this can hook into multiple things way. That said, I do think it hooks pretty strongly into the incentives for Zombie Scarlet Witch. When you look at what that card wants to do, that's kind of what the deck wants to do. Combo metas make you think harder. A lot of players are learning how bad they are at reading their opponents now that tech isn't very good. When mid-range tech slop is popular, then you really only have to say, oh, they're going to play a big guy left, then play Shang left without priority. I don't think this is true, actually. I think combo metas make reading your opponent easier as long as you have a willingness built in to retreat, because a lot of combos in Marvel Snap are some amount of face up if you have some basic game knowledge, right? You see the Deadpool getting bigger. You know if they have 7 energy to play Null Deadpool or Deadpool Zola or whatever. You know what the range is there. You see them play Mr. Negative. You see them play Jane Foster. You know what the range is there. You have a pretty good idea of that. I think that combo metas actually remove a little bit of reading from the game because it's just yes, no. There are plenty of combo decks that when they execute what they're doing, the interactive tools available to a mid-range deck are incapable of functionally dealing with it. That is not all combo decks, but it is more common with them. I think that the biggest issue I would say that I worry about with a combo meta, and I want to be clear, I don't think we're there yet, but in a world where we get to like what would a bad case scenario for a combo meta look like? I think what it would look like is it's not just the two ships passing in the night thing, it's that nobody would ever go to turn 6. I think about half the fun of a Marvel Snap game is that final turn. And the more combos are sort of telling people, this is what I'm going to do to you, you are smart to retreat. The more the skill expression of the game is in being smart to mitigate your losses, the less fun the game gets. So when I think of like, what are the potential downsides of Second Dinner's approach to balancing with regards to tech and combos, generally, that's the scenario that would worry me. I don't think we're there yet, but I do think that disincentivizing going to turn 6 could be a possible consequence of tech cards becoming A, less powerful, and B, more face up. So if I play my Stardust, you leave when you're playing Hela, for example. If I play my Mobius, you leave when you're playing Negative, for example. And if I don't play those cards, I leave because you're playing Negative, right? That would be the big worry that I would have for like, you know, my sort of catastrophizing, like the year is 20XX, everyone is playing Fox Dittos. That's what I'd be worried about for this direction. Again, I don't think we're there. I think we are pretty clearly not there. But that is the sort of worst case scenario fear that I have. I think any meaningful nerf to Luke Cage would be a shadow nerf to Cerebro by proxy. Personally, I think Luke should only protect 3 cost and under as a flavor text edition, since he's a street level hero who protects the little guys, but that's just me. Anyone who's watched this channel knows one of my favorite things to talk about is how universal Luke Cage is in his sphere and how much I hate that. I personally think that taking Luke Cage away from Cerebro would go a long way towards balancing it, because it would introduce Afflict as a way to interact with them that is not a cheap and easy way thing to get in your deck. That is something you definitely have to devote things to. I don't know if I have a solution for that, though, because there's fairly functional Cerebro decks at 2, at 3, at 4. My best idea for weirdly nerfing the impact Luke Cage has on Cerebro would be to make Luke Cage a 3/5, which I don't know if that's a good idea. Like, I thought about this a lot, and it's like, I guess we just have to make him a 3/5. Like, I don't have a good solution to what he is. Largely, though, I think when you talk about the issues I have with Cerebro, they're similar to the issues that one would have with Hela, which is that the power output is entirely from hand. You can't really interact with any of the things on the board in a meaningful way that disrupts the game plan from hand. So it just sort of is a yes-no situation on point counting. That's not particularly fun to me, and it's definitely not true of like most other combo decks in Marvel Snap. I think people might think of me as like a anti-combo gamer. I think Destroy is like the greatest deck that's ever been put together. Big fan of Discard. Even Move, I think, is a pretty cool deck. The issue is like Move Bounce, I think, is a little bit iffier, because the more you get to like final turn hand output, ha 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 ha, you can't do anything about this, the less I like the deck. But Cerebro is definitely in that space. Luke Cage is weird because what you could do to deal with a Cerebro deck in a world where Luke Cage didn't exist is like, okay, I want to play Scorpion. Not a good card, but I want to put Scorpion in my deck as my anti-Cerebro tech card. And then in other matchups, it's like kind of okay. But you can't do that because Luke Cage exists. Oh, I'm going to play Cassandra Nova as my anti-Cerebro tech card. It's not going to be a perfect solution, but it'll be there, right? And the fact that you can't meaningfully interact with your opponent's power in a deck that is built to be very fragile based around opponent's power output and what the numbers on their cards say, I don't think it's like a design flaw, but it does sort of irk me. It bothers me in a real way. Now, I do think that Luke Cage is not the primary culprit here, but I mean, I guess this is a long way of saying, you know, Luke Cage 3/5. Just 3/5 him. Just see what happens. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Marvel Snap is, quotes, F2P in a very predatory way. I'd rather be able to open the game once every few months, drop $50, and make the deck I want, whatever that deck may be, than have to consistently play X amount of games each day. This is one of those things where it's like, I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with the take if you didn't use the word predatory, because what you're effectively describing is they're not monetizing you properly. What you're saying is, my experience with this game is one where I cannot have the input to output for my money that I'm happy with. And I think if you just said that, I would not have an issue with this at all. But you also call them predatory in the same way, where I think if you had the system that you had, you could very easily turn around and say, Marvel Snap is so predatory. I come back every 3 months and spend $50 on a deck, and then 3 months later, that deck isn't even good anymore, and I spend $50 more. The point is, it's very easy to call any kind of digital game predatory because none of the things you're getting in the game are real. Like, it's very easy to do. It is the easiest thing in the world to describe pretty much any game economy of a live service game is predatory because the fundamental premise is you are paying real money for digital goods that are not transferable. It's very easy to say. So while I do think you are expressing a very real thing, which is that this game is not catering to the kind of player you are in a monetizable way, I don't think that makes them predatory. I just don't think that's the same thing. I think you are correct to assess that they are leaving money on the table, but I wouldn't describe leaving money on the table as predatory. It's just a different kind of monetization system, right? Like, I do think that if they could properly monetize people like you, they would love to do it. And for some reason, they haven't done it. But that's not predatory. I like having a combo meta. After living in the tech slot meta for years, it's about time we see some combo decks shine. It's also very cool to see decks like Destroy back in the fold after such a long absence. I 100% agree with this take. I think that a lot of people got very used to having tech slot be everywhere. I think that a lot of people were very used to being able to consistently have answers to everything in every game, and it doesn't have to be like that. What I will say, though, is I do think, again, we talked about the slippery slope, and this is a little bit of slippery sloping, right? The more Marvel Snap gets combo pilled, the more worried I become about the turn 6 issue that I talked about earlier. The issue of like whether or not the game actually goes to turn 6 becomes like a fairly prominent one for me. I think that becomes like a much more realistic worry if you are full comboing. I don't want the skill in the game to be about recognizing retreats. You know, I just don't think that's a good thing. I hate how most Series 4 releases feel like filler, cards with minor differences to existing cards, Chameleon or Jennifer Kale, boring, decent cards, Zombie Sentry and Omega Sentinel, and just unplayable, Mad Thinker, Toxie Doxie. This season was better at having playable cards, though. I guess my thing is, first of all, you're right. This season was way better at it. The Hunger, Zombie Sentry, and Zombie Giant Man, all quite good, but they're very limited in scope. I think that's the point of Series 4s. Like, sometimes, here's an example. I've been playing a lot of a different game that uses 12-card deck building, but you can run 2 copies of something. And I gotta tell ya, I feel like, not that Marvel Snap should let you do that, but I feel like there's so much room to make second copy of this effect that I want that I actually think they should do more of it. Now, maybe that stuff shouldn't be monetized. Maybe it's, again, a monetization system problem where it's Series 4, so it's 3,000 tokens, it has to feel like kind of worth it or whatever. But I gotta tell you, like, I was thinking, I would really love if there were more things that were like, I'm a card that's above rate and have a downside on me, right? I would love if there's just like another Rhino, you know? I would love another Rhino. I would love a small Red Skull, you know, a 3/8 that says +1 on the Red Skull effect. There's a bunch of cards like that where it's like, I want those to exist. I should be able to have those. And there's no reason why they can't, except for the fact that they can't be monetized, right? And so it's like, I think what you're describing is Series 4s are generally in that vein, right? Like, why isn't there an Activate Psylocke? I don't know. We should make one. That's Jennifer Kale, right? That makes sense to me. Like, they should do more of that. If anything, they should make 10 of those every season and make them all straight to Series 3, or like 1,000 tokens each and then straight to Series 3, or something, right? There should just be like a bunch of, they should make commons, is really what I'm trying to say. There's just like a ton of empty design space on the table. They could probably bang through a bunch of ideas in 6 months. Just make 5 extra cards a season and just chuck them in there. Spend no time on like testing or whatever, because it's not like these are all just like so anodyne that it's like, whatever, who cares, right? Like no one's going to be like, wow, that 3/8 Red Skull sure did break the game. You know, it's going to be fine. So just do a bunch of stuff like that. Like that's sort of what I think you're describing is that the price tag on them is too high for what they are. But I want more of those things. And if the price tag is the problem, then change the price tag. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.